If it's Friday, multiple gold bars, hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash, a Mercedes-Benz convertible, all part of a sweeping criminal indictment charging Senator Bob Menendez, a powerful Democrat, with bribery and corruption charges he denies. Plus, discord and dysfunction consume Capitol Hill, threatening to shut down the government as some House Republicans consider defying Speaker McCarthy and working with Democrats. And the White House dealing with both a major influx of migrants at the southern border and a major expansion of that historic auto strike, with thousands more union workers now walking off the job. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where a week that has been dominated by political dysfunction is ending with alleged political corruption, as New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez, the Democratic chair of the powerful Senate Foreign Relations Committee, has been indicted on felony bribery charges. The indictment accuses Menendez and his wife Nadine and 3 businessmen of accepting bribes from New Jersey businessmen in exchange for currying favors for the Egyptian government. Here's the U.S. attorney in New York laying out the sweeping charges.
Senator Menendez allegedly provided sensitive, non-public U.S. government information to Egyptian officials and otherwise took steps to secretly aid the government of Egypt. Senator Menendez used his power and influence to try to disrupt a criminal investigation and prosecution undertaken by the New Jersey Attorney General's office related to an associate and a relative of Uribe. Senator Menendez used his power and influence to try to disrupt a federal prosecution. Fortunately, the public officials the senator sought to influence did not bend to the pressure. That's a good thing.
Now, the Justice Department's 39-page indictment says the alleged bribes took place from 2018 to 2022. Included in the charging document, pictures showing cash that FBI agents found stuffed in jackets when they searched Menendez's home. They also found multiple gold bars at his house worth as much as $400,000 that prosecutors say were part of the bribery scheme. Menendez responded to the allegations today, denying he did anything wrong, while dismissing the charges as politically motivated and part of a campaign that, quote, cannot accept a first-generation Latino American from humble beginnings could rise to be a U.S. senator. It should be noted that U.S. Attorney Damian Williams, who brought these charges, is a Biden appointee and also the son of immigrants. Williams addressed the issue of potential political motivations and the ongoing investigation today.
Now, I want to make a couple of things very clear. First, my office remains firmly committed to rooting out public corruption without fear or favor and without any regard to partisan politics. That's in our DNA. Always has been, always will be. And second, this investigation is very much ongoing. We are not done.
Menendez is stepping down for the time being as chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, as he did 8 years ago when he was indicted on unrelated bribery charges. The DOJ dropped those charges in 2018 after the trial resulted in a hung jury the previous year. NBC's Ken Delanian has the latest on the Menendez investigation, and NBC's Sahil Kapoor is on Capitol Hill for us. Ken, I want to start with you. Break this down. What specific charges is Menendez facing?
He's accused in a 3-count indictment of conspiracy to commit bribery, conspiracy to deprive citizens of honest services. It's a fraud charge, and conspiracy to commit extortion. And perhaps the most disturbing element of this sprawling alleged conspiracy is the allegation that the powerful chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee leveraged his control over foreign aid to Egypt and military sales to Egypt to essentially enrich himself and his family. That's what they're saying here, that he and his wife developed a relationship with various Egyptian officials and an Egyptian-American businessman who they helped get a monopoly contract with the Egyptian government to provide halal meat, you can't make this stuff up, which the indictment says cost other businesses in the United States money, hence the extortion charge, and that this businessman provided a number of gifts and cash and other things. And then separately, the indictment says that he intervened in 2 specific criminal cases to benefit 2 other businessmen, one of whom gave his wife a $60,000 Mercedes-Benz convertible, which he did not declare on his financial disclosure.
And this is being brought by the SDNY, the Southern District of New York. Talk about why New York is bringing the charges against the New Jersey senator.
It's a good question. The indictment alleges that some of the conduct happened in New York, meetings in Manhattan restaurants, for example. It's pretty easy to get jurisdiction in a federal case. It just as easily could have been brought in Washington. But this office, SDNY, has a history of bringing high-profile political corruption cases. And I think, as the U.S. Attorney said, for people who are making a living right now accusing the Justice Department of being, a partisan operation, this is an inconvenient fact for them.
And as I said at the top, he was also indicted in 2015. Those charges were ultimately dropped. Is this a similar case? What are the differences here?
It has some similar components. One could argue this is a more serious case because it involves U.S. national security and U.S. policy. But essentially, they're alike in the sense that it was gifts for action. That was the allegations back in the other case, and he was alleged to have helped a Florida eye doctor with the various interactions with the U.S. government. The Florida eye doctor provided him luxury vacations and gifts. Now, at the end of the day, a jury hung on that case, and the Justice Department decided not to bring the charges again. The Senate Ethics Committee ended up admonishing Senator Menendez, saying he brought disrepute on the Senate. He shouldn't have taken those gifts, but he won re-election the next year.
All right. Great reporting, Ken Delaney, and really appreciate it. I know a lot of fast-moving developments on this story today. Sahil, let me turn to you and get the reaction from Capitol Hill. What are Senator Menendez's fellow Democrats saying at this hour?
Well, Kristen, it's been mostly silence from Democrats on Capitol Hill. Congress just broke for the long weekend yesterday, so not many of them are currently in town. The one member of Congress who stood up to defend Senator Menendez would be his son, the Congressman Bob Menendez, who expressed his unwavering confidence in his father, defended his integrity and values. There is Congressman Dean Phillips of Minnesota, the Democrat, telling our friends at CNN that he's disappointed and that Bob Menendez should resign. Privately, I've been texting with numerous Democratic strategists and operatives who are annoyed at the fact that Bob Menendez keeps getting involved in situations like this and do want party leaders to push him out. One of them, one Democratic strategist involved in New Jersey politics, texted me, quote, "Who among us hasn't had an FBI raid find gold bars and cash in their U.S. Senate jacket," unquote. That gives you a sense of how Democrats are feeling at this moment, Kristen.
Well, that says it all, Sahil. That's a pretty powerful statement there. When you think about the fact that this is happening against the backdrop of the 2024 election, Senator Menendez up for re-election, is there any talk of a primary challenge?
There has not been a serious primary candidate to jump in the race against Senator Menendez. For Democratic senators who are incumbents, getting a serious primary challenge is almost unheard of. The party has been snuffing these out in cycle after cycle after cycle for many years. Now, there is some precedent here in terms of what this could mean. In 2018, after Menendez escaped the previous corruption charges, he ran for re-election. He lost 38% of the vote in the Democratic primary to a virtually unknown challenger, which gives you a sense of the fact that New Jersey Democrats in that solid blue state were not particularly happy with Menendez and that he could be vulnerable there. Republicans, as you can imagine, have been piling on, including one candidate who's hoping to challenge Menendez, saying that this is further proof that he should be voted out, Kristen. And I will say one National Democratic Senate campaign aide, when I reached out to ask about this, said, quote, "Democrats have won every New Jersey Senate race since 1978. And assured that 2024 will be no different." Democrats still feel confident about holding that seat next year. They have to.
Yeah, you would think that they feel confident and yet privately a little jittery as well, given all of this. Sahil, let me turn to the other story you've been tracking throughout this week, and I know it's been a busy one for you, the dysfunction over in the House, this potential government shutdown. What is the very latest? Because my sources told me overnight there's no resolution in sight.
There is no resolution in sight. The House has been paralyzed for days. It's been paralyzed all week. Republicans can't seem to pass their long-term appropriations bills, the full-year funding bills that they've written just to get through the House of Representatives. They can't pass a short-term funding bill because a lot of members on the hard right who are making trouble, over those very same appropriations bills also say the government shouldn't be funded on a short-term basis. So for Speaker McCarthy, he's in a jam both ways because they're fighting right now about their opening bid. They haven't even begun seriously negotiating and compromising with the Democratic-led Senate, which would further anger these members. McCarthy did speak about this earlier today. I want to play what he had to say.
I think we made some progress to those who have been holding up passing the rule to get onto these bills. We got members working, and hopefully we'll be able to move forward on Tuesday to pass these bills. I still believe if you shut down, you're in a weaker position. You need the time to fund the government while you pass all the appropriations.
So does that...
Now, let's take the optimistic view for Speaker McCarthy, Kristen. Let's say they do pass these appropriations bills next week. That is not going to stop a government shutdown, which would occur at the end of this month, because, again, the Senate is not going to pass these bills that House Republicans are pursuing. So they're a long way off from figuring out a way to avoid this. Optimism, to the extent that it existed at all, has faded, that there will be a resolution before a shutdown. The question has increasingly become, what is going to happen? How are they going to reopen the government after it is shut down?
Yeah, everyone is asking that question, Sahil. What about this move by Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer to potentially try to get a vote in the Senate and then force a vote in the House, which obviously would require Democratic support? What are you hearing about that? How realistic is that?
Yeah, so before the Senate broke for the weekend, Schumer started moving a vehicle that he hopes to use as a continuing resolution to avert a shutdown next week, at least for the Senate to pass a bill to avert a shutdown next week. He hopes to have that vote early next week, but there are still a number of questions here. They haven't exactly figured out what would be in the bill, how long, would the continuing resolution be, when would funding be extended to, whether there would be Ukraine funding, disaster aid, and more importantly, Kristen, whether Republicans are going to hold that up, because at this point, they're going to need consent from all 100 senators to get this done before the September 30th deadline.
Looks increasingly unlikely. Sahil Kapoor, thank you so much for your great reporting. And joining me now is Nebraska Republican Congressman Don Bacon. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kristen. Thanks for having me on.
So I want to talk about the shutdown, but before we go there, let's just talk about the big news where we started at the top of the broadcast. Senator Menendez has now been indicted. I want your reaction, but I want to ask it this way. Does it make it harder for Republicans like former President Trump, other Republicans who are arguing there are two systems of justice? Does the fact that Senator Menendez has been indicted undercut the argument that there are two systems of justice?
I think it does to a degree, Kristen. I've always believed in our rule of law. It doesn't make it perfect for people, and people are we have flaws, but we have checks and balances. You have a jury system, you have appeals. So I trust our legal system to get it right in the end. And, the senator will get his day in court, but if he's guilty of what is charged, he deserves to be held accountable. What he did was wrong if they can make their case. I feel the same way when it comes with President Trump. I mean, people have their day in court, and the prosecutors present their case, and there's appeals processes. So we have a good legal system, the best that we can have with human beings running the whole thing.
All right, Congressman, thank you for that. Let's move on now to the shutdown. I mean, you are there in Nebraska, which kind of tells you everything you know about where these negotiations are. We thought maybe there would be some votes. Clearly, that's not happening. Give me your best sense right now. Do you think we are headed for a government shutdown?
I believe in the end we're going to get this done. We'll get a CR probably done next week or maybe early the following week. We'll see. But we have 5 or 10 people that refuse to get to yes. Some of them want to shut down, believe it or not, which I think is very short-sighted and foolish. And there's a saying that I heard that I like. I mean, these people vote against the Bible because there's not enough Jesus in it. Right? That's their mindset. And so I also call them the dysfunction caucus. They like chaos, and they're not team players. But we only have a 4-seat majority in the House, and we have 5 to 10 members that are doing this, depending on the bill. It does create this chaos that they don't know how to be a team. So in the end, and I've said this to the Speaker, who I support, that you got to work anyway with the Senate when it's all said and done. So let's just do that now. Let's do a bipartisan agreement. We'll do a CR, get the spending bills negotiated with the Democrats across the aisle, negotiate the best deal that we can as Republicans, and cut these 5 or 10 people out. I think we need to push them to the side and make them irrelevant because they're hurting the country, they're hurting the House, and they're hurting their party.
Well, let me talk to you about a potential off-ramp. As you know, there's talk of this potential discharge position. And just to kind of petition, I should say. And just to put that into plain English, it's basically a tool that allows lawmakers to force a vote on legislation, even if the speaker doesn't want to bring it up for a vote. Would you support that effort?
I would if it's the problem solvers bill that we have support. We have 64 members of the problem solvers, half Republican, half Democrat. And we agreed on a framework. That framework is a CR until January 11th. That'll give us time to get appropriations bills done. We'll also do disaster relief because we're out of money because of Hawaii and Florida. We would do Ukraine, which I support. I'm a Reagan Republican. We stand up to bullies. We help out those who are being invaded, like Ukraine has been. But we'd also have a very stringent border security provision in this. And this gets Republicans on board and Democrats on board with the other parts of this framework. We have draft legislation right now. We're just trying to fine tune it. But in the end, if we could get legislation that looks like that, I'm going to support it. And I believe we'll have good Republican and Democrat support.
Let me push you on that a little bit, though, Congressman. What if you can't come to an agreement on all of those different measures that you just talked about, Ukraine funding, for example? Would you support a short-term bill with nothing attached, a clean bill, a clean CR, as we say here in Washington?
If it's that or an actual shutdown, and we're talking a short-term, I will support the short-term CR. But there's some things we could get done. Our border is totally broke. 10,000 people crossed yesterday, and the administration says how many they detain, but then they release 90%, and it's hurting local communities all over. We have to support Ukraine, too, in my view. And we're out of disaster relief money. So there's things that need to be done that I think could have broad bipartisan support. And we ought to try to do that. So I'm for making a deal across the aisle now and making the best deal that we can as Republicans. You're going to have to do it anyway. We ought to just go to it now and not get caught up with these 5 or 10 members who want us to shut the government down.
As you well know, Congressman, part of the drama that is unfolding is these holdouts are also threatening Speaker McCarthy's speakership. Do you think his speakership is in jeopardy right now?
It's clearly about 5 of them don't want Kevin McCarthy to be the speaker. 200 of us plus or so or more do want him to be the speaker.
But it only requires one vote, Congressman. It only requires one vote to call a vote on his whole speakership. Do you think he's in jeopardy?
Right. It only takes 4 Republicans to potentially put him at risk and lose the speakership. But the fact is they have no alternative, zero alternative. They have nobody else that they could offer to put up that the 200 of us whatever vote for. I think the speaker's position is secure. It may go through turbulence with a vacate the chair motion. I don't think it would survive the table vote. I think especially if the speaker decided to start working across the aisle and get a bipartisan deal, I think you'd have some Democrats would probably vote present and not vote to vacate. In the end, I think the speaker is secure, though it's going to be turbulent. And we have 5 people that want it their way or the highway. The problem is the other 210 people don't.
Let me ask you about the other issue that will be coming up this week. Of course, as you're facing this shutdown deadline, the House is holding its first impeachment hearing for President Biden. Do you think it's appropriate for this to be happening this week while you're still struggling to keep the government open?
You know, we have 20 committees. All of our committees are going to be meeting this week. I don't think it's inappropriate. You know, I advised against going down the impeachment inquiry route. We had 3 committees that found all this information to begin with. If it wasn't for these committees, we wouldn't have known about the $20 million or the 20 LLCs that are out there. So I thought the right work was being done. And I think our country does not want to be the country that has impeachments with every president. So I think we should set a very high bar. You need direct evidence pointing towards the president. In my view, there's circumstantial evidence right now. But I believe them to be more cautious and meticulous with this process.
All right. Well, I know you have a heart out, Congressman, so I'm going to let you go. I really appreciate your answering all these questions. And as you point out, no hard evidence so far of a link between the president and his son's business dealings. But I know that there will be ongoing investigations into that on the Hill. Congressman, good to see you. Coming up, thank you. Coming up, sources tell NBC News President Biden told President Zelenskyy the U.S. would give Ukraine long-range missiles, which would give Ukraine the ability to strike behind the Russian front lines. But first, we'll go live to the Texas town that just declared a state of emergency amid an escalating migrant crisis on the southern border. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. President Biden is facing pressure from officials on both sides of the aisle to tackle the growing crisis at the U.S. southern border amid mounting frustrations at migrant centers in cities across America. An official tells NBC News about 8,200 migrants crossed the border illegally yesterday alone. Those numbers are creeping back up toward record levels. In response to the recent surge, the administration is sending an additional 800 active duty troops to the region to assist CBP with processing and logistics. The situation has roiled border communities, including Eagle Pass, Texas, where the mayor has declared a state of emergency as thousands of migrants cross into the border town. Joining me now is Guad Venegas at the border in Eagle Pass, Texas, and Monica Alba is at the White House. Thanks to both of you for being here. Guad, let me start with you. This is obviously a dangerous journey. Just take us there to the front lines. What are you seeing?
Kristen, so this is part of the river where a lot of the migrants have been crossing this week here in Eagle Pass. That's Via de las Negras in Mexico. There's a group of migrants right now, what appear to be migrants over on the other side. We've seen these smaller groups today arrive and cross the river throughout the day. It's a very surreal image because across the water on the Mexican side, we have seen Mexican law enforcement, members of the National Guard, local and what appears to also be state police who essentially patrol the area and watch as a lot of these migrants arrive, make their way across the river, and then they come here to this area that has been patrolled by the National Guard and also by Texas state troopers, where they've installed this wire. There's been a lot of reporting about the wire. At some point, the state authorities, Governor Greg Abbott, said that the wire had been cut for migrants to come in. We've been seeing a lot of these large groups, Kristen, come in through that area, and essentially they figured out a way to move the wire. They use sticks. They come inside, they come under the wire, and then Border Patrol will take them for processing. So you have a lot of different pieces moving here during this border crisis with large numbers arriving. So the state of emergency was declared by local authorities in Eagle Pass, who need more resources as the migrants who are seeking asylum are released in the United States under this parole. But before that happens, Border Patrol picks them up here, takes them in vehicles to a processing center. And even before that, they have what's a makeshift area right over here where they load them onto these buses. Now, just so you can have an idea, the local sheriff here in Maverick County told me that it takes about 45 minutes for one officer to process one individual. He used to be a Border Patrol agent, so he has a lot of knowledge of how that works. It's after that processing, if they are released in the country to continue with the asylum-seeking process, then they go to shelters or areas where then local authorities have to offer the help. So a lot of pieces moving here as these numbers have been rising this week, Kristen.
Wow, it truly is extraordinary to see in real time what is happening there, Guad, and really fantastic reporting. Monica, let me turn to you because you have been doing so much reporting on how the White House is responding. They talk about the fact, look, migrants ebb and flow in terms of the numbers, but they have sent troops to the border and taken other steps. What's the administration doing, Monica?
Yeah, and this has been a major question that we have seen this administration confront before, Kristen, and really this is a process that is ongoing with several different countries when we talk about this temporary protection status and extending that to many Venezuelans, as we just saw in the last couple of days. And essentially what happens here is that the administration can evaluate several countries. This takes likely weeks, sometimes months, and sometimes countries can be given this status and other times they can be reevaluated and redesignated in this way. And one example that we can think of for this would be essentially in Ukraine after the war started, TPS was given to those Ukrainians who were trying to flee from there within about 2 to 3 weeks. So just to give you a sense of how quickly but bureaucratically that process can still go, this is now something that several Latin American countries are also obviously being evaluated for, but it comes at a moment where there have been many officials, particularly particularly in New York City and New York State, that have been pressing the White House and the president to do more when it comes to trying to do something about migrants, specifically coming to that city. And what the White House will tell you day in and day out is that this is something that isn't obviously just affecting New York City. It's larger than that. And their main message here is that they would like for Congress to act. They continue to talk about bipartisan immigration reform, which they would love to see happen, but which, for a reality check, and as we know and you discuss often on this show, that's a really difficult sell right now in this divided Congress. So that's something you'll expect to hear the president continue to talk about, but that likely we won't see happen anytime soon, Kristen. That is for sure. This has been something they've been debating and discussing and wrestling with for decades, and it continues to be the root of the crisis. Monica, thanks for your great reporting, but don't go anywhere. It's a busy day. We're going to keep you around for more. Coming up after the break with the latest response from the White House after the auto workers union expanded its strike today and invited the president to the picket lines. That's next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Thousands more workers are joining the picket line in the auto workers strike. This morning, UAW President Shawn Fain announced 38 more facilities across 20 states are joining the strike, adding over 5,500 auto workers to the picket lines. Automaker GM pushed back on the escalation in a statement today, calling it unnecessary. In his live stream address this morning, Fain invited President Biden, among others, to visit the workers. Take a look.
We invite and encourage everyone who supports our cause to join us on the picket line, from our friends and families all the way up to the President of the United States.
I'm joined by NBC News correspondent Jesse Kirsch, who's in Pontiac, Michigan, and Monica Alba, who has stayed with us, the White House correspondent. Monica, you have breaking news. Tell us what you know.
Yeah, this is significant, Kristen. It's a question we had posed to the White House for some time now. We knew there were active discussions about it, and now we can confirm, according to a person familiar with the plans, that President Biden does plan to go to Michigan, to the picket line, to be with some of these auto workers who are clearly, obviously, on strike in this moment. And we expect that could take place as early as Tuesday. They're still working everything out, but it comes against the backdrop of what you just laid out there, which was for a couple of days, it was unclear exactly whether the president would be welcome there, what he wanted to do with this opportunity. But then once we saw that actual invitation from the union president extended, this was something that in the White House they were pleased to see. But of course, the politics of all of this, and for Joe Biden, who calls himself constantly the most pro-union president of all time, that is how he likes to identify himself, this clearly will send a message, because he is going to insert himself in this labor strike, clearly going and talking about the need for wanting to seek a fair contract for these workers. And now, over the last week or so, we have seen that the White House at the beginning of this was not maybe necessarily welcome to come to Detroit. It was a week ago today that President Biden said he was going to dispatch two of his top aides in Senior Advisor Gene Sperling and Acting Labor Secretary Julie Su. And then in the days that followed, they didn't end up going to Detroit. In fact, they had said they were going to be there. Then they kind of walked that back and said they were just going to participate virtually. So clearly, the White House has been a part of these talks, but they're not in any way a mediator, and they're not seeking to intervene here. But with the president now going, that does shift this in terms of their active engagement, clearly. And the other thing we can't fail to mention is that Donald Trump, the Republican frontrunner, the former president, is supposed to be in Michigan on Wednesday, and that's his own counter-programming to the second Republican primary debate, as you know well, Kristen.
Absolutely. The politics of this strike, very powerful. Fantastic that you were able to get that breaking news, Monica. Let me turn to you, Jesse, because as I said at the top of this segment, this strike is now expanding today. 38 state sites across 20 different states. Talk about what led to this expansion and what it means for the overall negotiations.
Yeah, so, Kristen, this shows two things. It shows progress with Ford, and it shows that Americans who are not directly tied to the auto strike could soon be carrying significantly more about the impacts of this, and I'll get to that in a second. But what the union had been warning of is if there wasn't substantial progress with the big three automakers by noon today, it was going to expand its strike. And so this morning, the union came out and announced the new strike sites. It announced strike sites at GM, it announced strike sites at Stellantis, but it did not announce any expansion against Ford. And the union made a point of saying that it has made progress with Ford. So that separates Ford out from the other two companies as far as progress in negotiations. And the reason more people may soon care about this is because the union is specifically targeting parts distribution at all parts distribution sites for GM and Stellantis across the country, as you mentioned, across 20 states. So what does that mean? If you need a repair or maintenance work done at a dealership, depending on what parts you need, that could take more time. I spoke with a dealer from the Midwest a short time ago. He said they've been stocking up extra on parts like brake pads, more of the routine maintenance. But if you need something like an engine overhaul, that could be something that could be very hard to, or that could be hard to come by throughout the duration of a parts distribution strike. And our understanding is this isn't something that will be a major financial blow to the company. So the pressure is ramping up on them, not from a financial standpoint, but potentially from a PR standpoint. And I just want to add one more point, Kristen. Shout out to Monica. She and I, for the last week, have been trying to figure out what is going on with the president's team coming here. And it's been very interesting to see the union's evolution in its commentary on the White House. A week ago or so, the union's president put out a statement saying that in part, the White House is afraid. Then the union's president denied saying those words in a statement. And here we are, the union calling for the president of the United States to come join the picket line, and the president appearing to be coming to Detroit. It's just been very interesting to watch all this unfolding. And of course, can't forget that Donald Trump is also planning to come here too. Lots to be watching on the political front here as well, and more Americans could be keyed into this pretty soon.
It's such great analysis, Jesse, and it just underscores how critical the union vote always is in any presidential election. As Monica talked about, the fact President Biden likes to think of himself as the union president, well, here former President Trump is making a strong play for that vote as well. Fantastic segment to both of you, Jesse and Monica. Thank you. And after the break, a standoff in Congress, corruption, and the dismal state of Americans' faith in the U.S. political system. The panel's next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. It's been a chaotic and historic week in Washington, and it's likely to get even worse next week as the government shutdown gets closer and with partisan warfare over impeachment beginning. Plus congressional gridlock and growing corruption issues. Amid it all, you would be forgiven for asking, is our political system working at all? For the most part, Americans say the answer to that question is no, with a recent poll showing just 5% believe our political system works very or extremely well. Joining me now, Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief for USA Today, Symone Sanders-Townsend, former senior advisor to Vice President Harris and host of Symone on MSNBC, and Brendan Buck, former advisor to House Speakers Boehner and Ryan. He's also an NBC News political analyst. Thank you for being here all. I want to start with this breaking news that Monica just reported, Susan, the fact that President Biden is now going to the picket lines. He's going to meet with union members in this UAW auto worker strike. What is the significance? What are the politics around this?
First, let me ask, who are the 5% who think our government is working very
Yes, exactly.
We need to call them. Employees of the Congress.
We've been saying that. We got to find them and bring them here.
Let's find that 5%.
Yes.
You know, I think President Biden was a little slow to get to the picket line, and then former President Trump said he was going to go. This is an important vote for him. This is an important group of voters for him, these union workers, and that the strike carries some peril for him if it has a big economic impact. So this is not a surprise really he's going to the picket line. Maybe a surprise it took him so long to say he was going to go there.
Pick up on that point, Symone, because you have former President Trump who has been saying now for a week he's going to go. He's counter-programming the GOP primary debate, which he's skipping, by the way. It underscores the importance of union workers. But Biden has always said he's the union president. Why did it take him so long to reach this conclusion?
You know, and I think Biden, and they have done a lot as it relates to unions and labor in this administration. But the implications, as Susan just alluded to, are very real. Look, you have electric vehicles, you have the parts piece that, you know, Monica laid out and folks have, and Jesse talked about. And if this affects how Americans already, folks feel like it takes a little longer to get the things they need. If this affects that, if prices go up because there are not a lot of parts and whatnot, then yes, the president will bear some responsibility. And so I think the White House has been walking a kind of line. I don't think there's any doubt that, you know, President Biden stands with the UAW workers, but nobody wants a strike. And the White House, for a while, didn't think there was going to be a strike at all until, you know, some union folks and Debbie Dingell had to tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, y'all need to come. Y'all need to look what's going on in Michigan.
This is a real thing. Talking about the potential ripple effects of that and pivoting to another crisis that we are watching, Brendan, the potential ripple effects if there's a government shutdown. You know this all too well. You have been on Capitol Hill when things are at the brink. Do you see Republicans finding a resolution to this? I mean, how does this all end? Or do you think we're headed for a shutdown?
Yeah, it's actually really hard to parse out because I've been through several government shutdowns and I've never seen a situation this dire. I mean, there's so much effort and energy and hurt feelings around just a House bill that is dead on arrival, like no question. No one is even asking the question, how are you going to get something through the Senate and through the White House? This is all about Republicans' unwillingness to do anything with Democrats. It's the culture of the House Republican Conference. It always has to be us. Can't ever do anything with Democrats. And they're not even entertaining those questions that are so obvious. This has to be bipartisan, but they can't even get themselves there.
Susan, to that point, I mean, how does this end, given the gridlock that Brendan just laid out? And when you hear that context, that he's never seen anything this bad, I mean, are we just headed for a shutdown? And is the real question how long it's going to last?
You know, it's not even that the Republicans are unwilling to engage in bipartisan action with Democrats. It's that Republicans are at war with one another. And I think it is very hard to see how we do not have a shutdown. The question is how long it will go on. And the other question is, does Speaker McCarthy survive a shutdown, and what then has to happen to get the government back up and running again?
You take me to my next question. Is he going to survive this? Symone, obviously not your party, but you understand the politics well. Do you think his speakership survives this?
You know, I am leaning towards the no. And this takes me back to the debt ceiling. Yes, it just takes me back to the debt ceiling fight. I remember when there was all this fight about the debt ceiling, and it ended up that the White House did end up negotiating with Speaker McCarthy on the debt ceiling, essentially the budget as well. And that negotiation had to happen because if not, it would be the White House that would have borne the brunt of the fallout. In this situation, Speaker McCarthy needs to negotiate with Democrats, and he does not look like he will. It seems as though he will not. The Democrats are not going to lean over to offer olive branches. And because he, at this point, will not, he will bear the brunt of the fallout, and I think that's why his speakership will not survive. He doesn't run the caucus.
It's hard to look at this and not think that some of the House Republicans are doing this to set him up to fail at some point. I mean, it is nonsensical. Some of the things that they are talking about, their unwillingness to do anything reasonable, feels like they're just setting him up to blame him later. And,
you know, Democrats would be happier about that if they had some idea who was going to follow him.
Right.
And whether it would be somebody who'd be worse or better for their
This is true. It might be another 15 rounds.
Well, and I guess that's the big question. And for this, Symone, I go back to you. I mean, you do have a little bit of movement with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer saying, look, let's get something done on the Senate side and then force a vote in the House. Do you think that's how this ends? And does the president need to intervene here? He's still the president. This is still his government.
I just wonder what kind of sway Joe Biden has on Speaker McCarthy. Remember, Speaker McCarthy
how
and
about
Joe
his
Biden.
Bully pulpit? He could use his bully pulpit.
They did their negotiations, though. Joe Biden said he was not going to negotiate on the budget. He did during the debt ceiling fight. And it was that negotiation that Speaker McCarthy could not come back and sell to his entire caucus. I think what happens is the Senate, they get together, they be the adults that they are, they try to force something in the House. But again, I just do not see Speaker McCarthy playing ball. This is like the third strike for him as it relates to the Freedom Caucus.
I think the White House and Chuck Schumer all know they can't bail him out yet. Kevin McCarthy needs to fail a few more times. He needs to fail right up to the deadline and basically get permission. I have tried everything, guys. I've gone down every path you've wanted me to. None of them work. I'm sorry. I have to go. He'll still catch grief, but he has to go through all of these stages to get there.
Let's talk about the other big story on Capitol Hill today. Senator Bob Menendez and his wife have been indicted on bribery charges, among other things. Susan, how big of a bombshell is this? And which party kind of bears the bigger blow in this sense? Because on the one hand, you have it kind of undercutting the key argument from Republicans that there are two systems of justice. On the other hand, the Democrats don't welcome this news.
You know, you're innocent until you're proven guilty, but boy, did the U.S. attorney make Menendez look guilty with his indictment. I mean, it's almost comical, the gold bars and the Mercedes, and I mean, it's quite the indictment. I think it's bad for Democrats. I'd be surprised if Menendez survives as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. It's bad for politics. I mean, it's bad for trust in our government. And it's probably also bad for Republicans because, as you say, this Justice Department, led by Merrick Garland, doesn't just go after Republicans like Donald Trump. They're going after a very senior Democrat.
Symone, how much concern is there if, in fact, it gets to a point, and we're not there yet, as Susan says, you are innocent until proven guilty, but if he winds up stepping down or if he's primaried, I mean, how concerned are Democrats that this seat could be in jeopardy? New Jersey, obviously, is a blue state.
It's a blue state. It's been a blue seat for a very long time, so I don't think Democrats are concerned about losing the seat. But I think this is bad for not just the optics, but how people feel, right? It's very hard to distinguish if, Democrats are going out there on the campaign trail saying, we are the party, these folks say they're the party of law and order, but we're the party of law and order. We are the party that are standing up, and we are not the corrupt folks they are. It's kind of difficult when you have a sitting United States Senator, chairman of the committee, which I do believe, given the Senate rules, he is stepping down, though, who it just muddies the waters. And this is why people feel as though, regular American folks, not political professionals, that Democrats and Republicans is kind of all the same, even though it is not.
Right, Brendan, it goes back to where we started the conversation. Only 5% say the government's working.
Yeah, they're losing the moral high ground is what they're losing. And that's the argument they've been trying to make is, the Republicans are the corrupt party, and this really undercuts that. The other issue is you have a person who's clearly very dug in. Usually somebody gets caught with gold bars, they kind of understand maybe the time for me to go. This is a person who's been indicted previously for corruption. Obviously, that ended in a mistrial, but someone who doesn't seem like he's ready to leave and is probably going to fight this out. And it's kind of the same deal we're running into with George Santos in the House, who doesn't feel like he feels like the need to leave. The longer he sticks around, the more problems he creates.
Finally, last topic, Susan, and we only have about a minute left, but weigh in on this crisis on the border. You have the Biden administration, this all-hands-on-deck approach. They're sending troops down, this temporary protective status for Venezuelan migrants, about 500,000 of them. Obviously, this is a situation that ebbs and flows, but do you think this feels different this time around?
I think no more difficult issue exists for this administration than the issue of the crisis at the border. It's hard to deny it's not a crisis. And now we have not only Republicans in Texas talking about it, but Democrats in New York City and New York State saying it's a crisis and calling on the administration to do more. This action on Venezuelans, allowing close to 500,000 Venezuelans to work legally, an important step, but the concern is, does that just encourage more people to come over the border illegally?
And some advocates say actually it should be expanded to more nationalities, so they're getting it from both sides. Thank you all. Fantastic conversation. Susan, Symone, and Brendan, appreciate it. Still to come, an inside look at how one local community is bringing Iowans and Ukrainian refugees together amid the war's historic humanitarian fallout, as the White House vows to send more weaponry to the front lines of the fight. That reporting is next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. During their meeting at the White House, President Biden told Ukrainian President Zelenskyy for the first time the U.S. will provide Ukraine with a small number of long-range missiles known as ATACMS. But it's not clear when those weapons would be delivered. President Biden also announced $325 million in new aid in the meeting. That money is separate from the $24 billion for Ukraine that the White House is asking for from Congress, which is part of the ongoing spending fight among House Republicans. As the fight over Ukraine aid continues in Washington and out on the campaign trail, NBC's Alex Tabbitt has a look at how one Iowa community is helping Ukrainian refugees start a new life.
After nearly 19 months of war, more than 6.2 million Ukrainian refugees have spread around the world.
It's like second life. We start again.
including Natalia and her son, who found peace in the small town of DeWitt, Iowa.
In Iowa, I met good people, kind.
Yana and Elena are also starting anew in Iowa, taking jobs as a painter and a housekeeper.
It's my life. It's my second life. We are very grateful to the USA and American people for the support.
While lawmakers in Washington are in the midst of a bitter fight over government spending, including aid to Ukraine, here in Iowa, refugees are receiving support from the local nonprofit Iowa Nice.
These are young, hardworking families that really just want to find a safe place to settle.
Angela Bolins is the founder of Iowa Nice, an organization that helps Ukrainian refugees find homes, cars, jobs, whatever they need for a fresh start and to feel welcome.
Iowa Nice says they've relocated 27 refugees right here in DeWitt, but just as they've started to settle down, the rhetoric's been ramping up.
Do you think that our security, the United States security, is linked to Ukraine's security?
I think that Europe has to do more. We're in for $200 billion. They're in for $25 billion, and it affects them more than it affects us.
Some GOP presidential hopefuls questioning American involvement in the war.
And I think it is a misplaced priority that we're defending against an invasion across somebody else's border.
They are doing a blank check policy without telling us when we will have achieved our objective.
And the rhetoric's reflective of a shift in public sentiment. According to a CNN SSRS poll from July, 45% of all registered voters think Congress should authorize more funding to aid Ukraine. Among Republicans, that number drops to 28%. And a Quinnipiac poll from August showed that 58% of all Republican registered voters think the U.S. is doing too much to help Ukraine.
While I kind of understand that sentiment, it is a lot to invest in another nation. I also think that getting to know these people personally makes it feel very much worth it to me.
Waning interest in providing funding to Ukraine has refugees like Elena anxious.
Yes, I worry because Ukrainian, it's my country. I love you, my country.
Alex Tabbitt, DeWitt, Iowa.
Well, we appreciate Alex's fantastic reporting, that perspective that we don't often see. Alex is one of our Iowa 2024 campaign embeds. Great reporting by him. NBC's Courtney Cubey joins me now for the latest on long-range missiles to Ukraine. Our Pentagon correspondent. Courtney, incredible reporting as always. So walk us through the back and forth over these ATACMS. What does it mean that President Biden has now approved some to be sent to Ukraine?
So this is something that Ukraine's been asking for months, and President Zelenskyy has been very vocal about it. The argument is these longer-range systems would provide Ukraine with the ability to fire beyond Russian front lines. So going after things that the military calls their command and control nodes, going after what the military calls their supply lines, essentially being able to stop Russia from resupplying and direct their troops out in the field by hitting back beyond the front. That has been the argument for some time. Now, Ukraine does have some longer systems that can go after some of these targets, but they argue that they need even longer range, including so that they could strike targets in Crimea. Well, the U.S. has been resistant. One of the main reasons that we've heard for months is that simply the U.S. doesn't have enough ATACMS, these long-range missiles, in their own arsenal to provide to Ukraine. But beyond that, defense officials have quietly whispered, and U.S. officials, that they're concerned about Ukraine striking in Crimea and that escalating the situation, escalating the war, provoking Vladimir Putin even more than what we've already seen over the last year and a half plus in Ukraine. Now, fast forward to this week when we started hearing rumblings that the Biden administration was leaning towards potentially sending these, specifically sending a variant that includes cluster munitions. Now, we finally learned, according to a couple of U.S. officials and a congressional official, that, in fact, President Biden, while meeting with President Zelenskyy at the White House on Thursday, did tell him the U.S. will move forward with providing the ATACMS. But the big question is, when will they send them? How many will they send? And exactly what variant will go, Kristen? Those are all questions that we simply don't have answers to that yet.
I'm glad you say that, because that was my next question, Court. So let me move on to my next question, which is, look, there's been so much debate over these ATACMS. Can you put them into broader context? Are they controversial, for example, like the cluster munitions? How should we be thinking about them?
Yes, cluster munitions have been controversial, but remember, the Biden administration started providing those to Ukraine back in July. Human rights groups have argued that the dud rate or failure rate can be high, and it can cause civilians, including children many times, to be injured or even killed. So what that means is a cluster munition is one that when it explodes on a target, it releases a bunch of smaller bombs, often called bomblets, on an area, but they don't always explode. In fact, some have a dud rate that the U.S. uses upwards of 2%. Well, then those can be lodged in the ground. They're shiny. Kids, people find them. They can get injured. So that can be very controversial. So if the U.S. provides those, we should expect to hear some human rights groups that will denounce it, Kristen.
Well, tremendous reporting. Courtney Kube, thank you so much for joining us this hour. And thank you for joining us this hour. We will be back Monday with more Meet the Press Now. And if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press on your local NBC station. I'll have interviews with Congressman Jim Clyburn, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, and presidential candidate Chris Christie, plus a brand new NBC poll that you won't want to miss. NBC coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.